Alright, YouTube, if there's one thing Hillary Clinton probably didn't want to do, it was have to campaign in Michigan 2 days before the election is held. But that's exactly what she's doing. She's also going to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Some of these states that are now completely in play, they are now swing states. The fact that Michigan was ever a possible swing state to begin with illustrated the point that I made many, many moons ago, before the general election even began, when Trump still hadn't quite sewn up the nomination. It became clear that if ever there was a candidate within the GOP that could take parts of the Rust Belt away from the Democratic Party and turn them red, it was Donald Trump. That's indeed what he appears to be doing. If his actions are any indicator, his internal polling is painting a much more rosy picture in Pennsylvania and Michigan than perhaps others believe. Now, the fact that Hillary Clinton is campaigning there in a state that at one time she was up 10 points in shows me, it illustrates for me the proof that her own internal polling also shows a very tight race, and she cannot lose the state of Michigan. If she loses Michigan, if at any point in the night on election night we see that Trump is up in Michigan, he has won the election. It will be over. I will declare him the victor. It won't matter what happens in Nevada. It won't matter what happens in Colorado. It just won't matter anymore. The electoral total will be in his favor so heavily. It wouldn't matter if she wins Florida. She'll still lose the election. She's done. There is now a possibility that that's the case. Now, Michigan, I was correct on one thing. For a while, it looked like I might be wrong, and I actually said, oh, well, that's rather odd. But now looking at the polling, it looks like I was actually right. I said also months ago, Michigan was more in play than Wisconsin. And indeed, it looks like she's going to hold on to a narrow victory there, 2 or 3 points, much less than Obama. But she could lose the state of Michigan. In Pennsylvania, it's all tied up. It has to do with turnout and or polling bias. If there's any bias in the polls in favor of Clinton at all, which is a possibility, or if turnout is in Trump's favor, which is, I think, a bigger possibility, he wins Pennsylvania. Again, if he wins that, the election is essentially over. He might end up winning Virginia as well. There's a tightening of the race there. Nate Silver comes out. Look at what I told you days ago. Nate Silver has persisted since this race began, before the general even began. Back during the primaries for the Republican Party, he claimed well after Super Tuesday that Trump was an outsider that could never possibly gain traction. At the end of the day, somehow he would be stopped from the nomination. It didn't happen. He's now persisting, as far as his numbers go, in the delusion that Trump is significantly enough behind to put him at 30, 35, or thereabouts. He is wrong. There is no mathematics behind what he's doing. It is bias on his part. I don't care what he wants to say about his algorithms. It's his own personal bias, just as the primaries were. That being said, he's trying to salvage his career. Should he be wrong, which is now more likely than not, in my estimation, and Trump wins, he wants to make sure that he puts it out there that there's some reason to believe. He's done this twice now. First, he sends out a tweet some days ago. Oh, well, yeah, maybe there is systemic polling bias in the Democrats' direction, laying the groundwork for a cop-out when he's probably wrong. Now today he comes out and he talks about, oh, well, Hillary Clinton is one flip state away from losing the election. Well, that's funny. Your numbers have Trump's possibility of winning at 35%. So, which is it, Mr. Silver? It appears he's pulling a Scott Adams in a more malevolent way. He's trying to take both sides of the issue, laying sort of a situation where, regardless of who wins, he can claim he was right. Well, I'm going to hold you to your algorithms because that's what you always talk about. So when you're probably wrong, I'm going to laugh a little bit. Clinton does not want to have to be campaigning in Michigan, but she is. And I predicted many months ago that that would be the case, that the Rust Belt was going to be the region where Trump could outcompete any other Republican, could potentially steal states away from Clinton, while holding a bulwark in the South against a Clinton machine that back in the 90s managed to make inroads in the Deep South. Of course, Bubba Bill turned several of those states blue. Clinton hasn't. Anyone pretending Georgia is still in play is deluding themselves. It was never in play to begin with. Trump held the bulwark against the Clinton campaign. He had the support in the Deep South and the Rust Belt at higher levels than he had them anywhere else. The flyover states were going to go Republican anyway. There was no paradigm shift there. They're still controlled by evangelicals. Literally the only state where the shift has negatively affected Trump as opposed to negatively affecting the Democrats is Utah. And it looks like that's going to remain red as well. McMullen isn't making enough inroads. He's not going to do anything. Arizona will remain red. That's just the way that it will be. The one thing I perhaps have been wrong about in the last few days here is that I assumed that Nevada was going to be more red than Colorado. It looks now, judging on early voting, it looks like Nevada might actually be safe blue, all things considered. And it's actually Colorado where the Republicans have the advantage. At the end of the day, though, state for state, it doesn't matter. There's still minor states, speaking in terms of electoral votes. But either way, he wins one of those two states, he surges ahead of what Hillary has as far as hardened support. Now, I look at the map. I look at the maps that people like Sabato or Silver are using, where they've still got Georgia or Arizona as swing states. They just barely move Michigan into swing state status. They don't bother for Virginia. They don't bother. I mean, they keep North Carolina, where Trump is arguably up 5 or 6 points. That's a swing state. But in Virginia, where Clinton's up maybe 3 or 4 points at this point, oh no, it's solid blue. It's nonsense, honestly. The only state where they get it right, where a lot of Trump fans have gotten it wrong, is New Hampshire. I still believe that Clinton is very likely to win the state of New Hampshire. But there's one aside. There's one way I could be wrong here, and that's Bernie Bros. And that's also at play here in Vermont. While Vermont is technically a deep blue state, it's like 65% partisan Democrats, there's a possibility that enough of those partisan Democrats are Bernie Bros and will vote for Bernie or not vote at all to give the state either to Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. That possibility remains. As far as the Rust Belt goes, I get to once again say my analysis many months ago was completely correct. That is the region in which Trump is out competing. Ohio is now a red state. There's no chance that Hillary Clinton will take Ohio. Indiana is a red state. There's even less of a 0% chance that she takes Indiana. Pennsylvania is tied up. Michigan's apparently tied up. Clinton wouldn't be campaigning there unless her internal polling jived with or showed an even more negative number for her than the national polling that shows about a tie or maybe a 2% lead for Clinton in the state of Michigan. If there's any turnout differential at all, and it's almost certainly going to be on Trump's side that gains from it, then she loses Michigan. And if she loses Michigan, she loses the election. She will lose. Wisconsin would be the same deal. She can't afford to lose either of these states. She can technically afford to lose Pennsylvania if she manages to retain Virginia, retain New Hampshire, manages to make inroads enough to win Florida, then Pennsylvania matters less, but there's no guarantee for her she's going to do that. In fact, I would say it's relatively unlikely. 2 of the 3, yeah, that's likely. 3 of 3, I don't think so. I think she's going to lose Florida. When I look at the map where people have Trump at like 160 and Clinton pushing 230 in already tallied votes, what polls are you looking at for these things? That's not what I'm seeing. Even if I assume that like CBS and CNN aren't bought out by the Clintons and inflating her numbers, even if I look at that aggregated total, that's not what I'm seeing. How the hell is it that North Carolina's a swing state and Virginia's not? Trump's lead in North Carolina at this point is probably larger than any lead Clinton has retained in Virginia. So how is it not a swing state? Why are you assuming that it's going to go blue? I can't make that assumption. I think that a lot of these people are going to be very, very upset on election night because they're setting themselves up for failure. They're taking the rosiest, most optimistic polls for Clinton, aggregating them together and painting a picture by which she's up by 5 points nationally. I don't think that that's the case. I think if you look at the preliminary results of early voting in places like Florida and Colorado, you will see that Trump is potentially exceeding his expectations. In some cases, you got to realize the early voting period overlaps with his worst period of performance during this election, specifically after the sex tape. People were already early voting in some of these places at that point. And yet he still comes out on top when he was supposedly 5 points behind in the polls. And only within the last couple of days, essentially, has he pulled ahead in some of these states. He still manages to win or tie in some of these states. No, I think he's going to knock it out of the park in some of them. Iowa's no longer really in play. Ohio is no longer really in play. North Carolina is probably no longer in play. There's 3 battleground states right there that I can already tell you are almost certain to vote for Trump. If he makes inroads, if there's a turnout differential, bias polling, whatever explanation you want to use, in Michigan, and he wins that state, the election is fundamentally over. Because Clinton could win both Colorado and Nevada, which at this point is less likely than 50-50. Or she could win Florida, and the damage would have already been done. This is one of the bigger states. This is one of the big blue states that she needs to retain. It would be like losing Illinois or something like that. It'd be worse than losing Wisconsin. It's as bad as losing Pennsylvania. She might lose them both. She loses Michigan and Pennsylvania, the election is certainly over. She could put all the other battleground states together, and she'd barely come out above Trump. And the chances of her putting them all together are so slim that it's not even worth talking about. I believe Trump will win the election. It's better than Clinton winning it. I'm not a huge Trump fan. I made it clear. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Trumpite. I'm also not a never-Trumper. I'm not a Republican at all in any sense of the word. I don't have an ideology that syncs up with either of the major parties. But Trump is certainly preferable. And because there's no longer a viable third-party candidate, Johnson pissed away what viability he had. Stein was never viable. I'll be voting for Trump. And I do encourage others to do the same. I'm sure Clinton must be very nervous to be slumming around in Detroit right now, or Flint. You know, she doesn't even like being around that sort of person. Well, middle class and working class people she has nothing in common with. She certainly has nothing in common with the average black voter. She's like Al Sharpton. She just uses it as a wedge issue, racial wedge issue to get votes, and then she forgets about them for the next 4 years. It's what she does. It's what most of the politicians do, both on the right and the left, by the way. And don't pretend that it's just a problem with the Democratic Party. She won't accomplish anything that'll help the black communities up in Michigan. I think some of them realize this, and that's why she's doing so poorly. It's not all, and trust me, it's not white Detroit voters that are buoying Trump up in the state of Michigan. Her internal polls must be pretty shitty indeed for her to even bother going there. But she is. It's fantastic because it's exactly what I predicted would probably happen towards the end of the election. She's running scared. She thought she was going to coast to victory. Oh, I'm 4 or 5 points up in these states. I don't even have to worry about them. All of a sudden, she finds out it's basically a tie and that her opponent is gaining ground and will be for the next 48 hours. She's like, oh, shit. I can't afford to lose this state, even if it's only by 2 or 3 votes. I'm screwed if I lose Michigan. I would encourage all the people of Michigan, if you're like a Clinton fan, please consider voting Trump just to troll these people. Can you imagine their reaction, how fucking hilarious it's going to be? If only for that one purpose, just do that for me. Because watching their faces, watching the face of like Rachel Maddow melt live on air, all of a sudden, she goes from like her chuckle face, her smarmy face, all of a sudden her skin starts to sag down on her jowls and so forth, and that mop of hair that she calls a hairdo, it's really just a brisket chunk that's been burnt or something, just starts sloughing off all over the place. It'll be better than watching like the zombies melt in Evil Dead, like the Deadites, or what was it, the first Indiana Jones there, when they open the Ark of the Covenant and the Nazis are melting and screaming and stuff. It'll look a little bit like that, I assume. Watching like Shepard Smith, even watching some of the idiots on Fox News, watching Bill O'Reilly, you can tell he's not, particularly a Trump fan. It'll be funny to watch his reactions, like, oh God, this New Yorker won the presidency, he's a secret Democrat or something like that. It's going to be hilarious. It's going to be absolutely hilarious to watch these people. Although at the same time, watching some of these people melt down if Clinton wins will be funny too. I can't lose. By the way, if we keep doing the same thing for 4 years under Clinton, it'll be another Obama. Okay. Screw the economy in general, but I'll do fine. And if Trump wins, he's going to reform the tax code probably, and I'll do even better. So I can't lose. Either way, millions of people have a nervous meltdown. You probably will see some disturbances. You'll probably see protests and riots, no matter what happens. It doesn't even matter at this point. People have become so polarized because of Clinton's bullshit that there'll probably be people sparring in the streets in some of these urban communities where, a far-right neighborhood and a far-left neighborhood happen to overlap within a block or something. They'll be fighting each other in the streets. They'll be drunk. So, yeah, it's going to be great. That's about all. Peace out.